Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Rochelle from Rochelle.Handmade.Designs, and in this video we will be talking about our fourth top as part of the top series, which is our wrap top. Now I did change patterns of what I wanted to sew. So originally I was going to sew McCall 7627, but decided to switch and go ahead and do New Look 6560 View C. So that's the pattern that I'll be sewing along to in this video. So let's go ahead and get right on into the new video. Okay, so let's talk about the supplies that you will need in order to construct the fourth top, which is the wrap top. The first thing you will need is the pattern. So this is New Look 6560. I am doing View C. You could do whatever view that you would like, but this tutorial is for View C on this pattern. I also use rotary cutters, like I have said in previous videos. I use one for paper, one for fabric. I never mix the two. I have a set of pins that I will be using. And then I have my marking tools. I have a white pencil. I'm not using dark fabric, so I really do not need this at all. I have a Mark Be Gone Disappearing ink, some chalk because I'm using gingham fabric or plaid fabric, to where on the back pattern piece I needed to mark my line to make sure that it's in the center. And then I also have a seam ripper to rip out any seams if I make a mistake, a point turner to turn out any point or sharp edges, and then I also have my fabric scissors. So that's all the supplies that you will need in order to construct this garment. So let's go ahead and get right on into the tutorial. Okay, so let's talk about the pattern pieces that you will need in order to construct this wrap top. The first pattern piece you will need is pattern piece number 14, which is the back. I am doing View C, so this is the back of View C, and you need to cut one on fold. One thing I want to make a note of is if you're doing gingham fabric or plaid fabric like I am doing, you will not be cutting this on the fold. You cut a single layer, draw out a line, and then you will cut half of the pattern piece and then flip it over and cut the other half out, not cutting where the fold line is. So that's how you would do it for your gingham fabric. Any gingham fabric you never want to cut two of, you want to cut single layers. So that's just a tip for you. The next pattern piece is pattern piece number 13. This is the yoke front. You need to cut two of fabric. Next pattern piece is pattern piece number 12, which is the front. You need to cut two of fabric. Next pattern piece is pattern piece number 7, which is the back facing. You need to cut one on the fold of fabric and one on the fold of interfacing. The next pattern piece that you want to cut out is pattern piece number 6. You need to cut two of fabric and interface two. And this is your front facing. The next pattern piece that you will need is pattern piece number 15, which is the sleeve band. You need to cut two of fabric. And the last pattern piece that you will need is pattern piece number 10, which is your tie, and you need to cut 4 of fabric if you're doing View C. If you're doing any other views, you need to just cut 2. So that's all the pattern pieces that you will need in order to construct this wrap top. So let's go ahead and get right on into the sewing. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is do your stay stitching. Stay stitching is done at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So you want to stay stitch the front, the center front edge right here. So make sure you stay stitch this portion on pattern piece number 12, which is your front. You're gonna stay stitch also pattern piece number 13, this side right here. And then you're also going to stay stitch in the direction of your arrows. If you have your instructions, you're going to stay stitch the upper edge of your back pattern piece as well. Do your stay stitching and come back and we'll continue. Okay, so I went ahead and did my stay stitching to the center front of pattern piece number 12, which is my front. I went ahead and stay stitched my yoke front, which is the side edge right here. I also went ahead and did the stay stitching around my neck edges for the back. So now that I have all of those things, my stay stitching done to my front, yoke front and my back, I went ahead and gathered the upper edges between the notches, my shoulder seams, of my front pattern piece. Right in between the notches, you want to go ahead and create 2 rows of stitching for your gathers. Now what you want to do, I'm going to put one out of the way. You want to go ahead and gather between those 2 notches. So what you want to do is gather between those 2 notches. And this is for your yoke front to be able to fit onto your front pattern piece. All right. Now, after you gathered, grab pattern piece number 13, which is your yoke front. And there should be, this is your yoke front. There should be 2 notches at the very bottom of your yoke front. So with right sides together, you're going to pin matching up the notches. And then using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and at the end and finish off your seams. Okay, so now that I have done my front and my yoke front, and I went ahead and serged the seams and pressed the seam up towards the yoke front. So I'm gonna move this out of my way and grab my back pattern piece, which is pattern piece number 14. So what you want to do is go ahead and make your fishtail darts. So with wrong sides up, I have a video, the blousing top and the bardo or bar dot top. It does walk you through on how to make the fishtail darts. So the first thing you want to do is go ahead and draw your lines. This will help you make them accurately. And then I have another dot down here, so I'm going to draw a line from this center dot to this bottom dot, and then do the same thing for the other side. All right, so after you make your darts, draw the lines for your darts. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to match up your dots. So I'm going to do one and then you can do the other one yourself. So make sure you put the pin through that dot, make sure it's coming out on the dot on the other side. Then where my yellow chalk is, I'm going to put the pin on that side and make sure it's coming out on the top. So you want to pin all the way to this center dot right here. So I'm going to do that again. Look on the other side, make sure my pin is on that line, and then come out on the opposite side and make sure I'm on that line as well. And then I'm going to do the dot right here. So there's a dot there. It's a little off, so just manipulate my fabric just a little bit. And then I'm going to check on the opposite side to make sure it's on the line, and it is. Now, after I do this side, I'm going to turn my top around and go from the bottom to the center again. All right, so now that you have pinned it, you're going to start at this dot, back stitch at the beginning, so on the line, and then when you get to this dot, you want to stop, do not back stitch. You're just going to pull up the thread and then make like 2 knots to tie it, but do not back stitch at this dot. Once you do that, you're going to turn it around. Starting at the center dot again, you're going to back stitch at the dot again, and then sewing on the line, you're going to go all the way to this dot. Do not pass this dot. Stop at this dot, pull, use some threads, pull the threads, and then you're going to tie 1 or 2 knots to keep it in place. So you're going to do that. Once you complete your fishtail darts, you're going to press it towards the center of the garment. So you're going to do both darts the same exact way. Okay, so now that I went ahead and did the fishtail darts in the back, now you want to grab your front pieces and with right sides together, you're going to attach the front to the back at shoulders. So make sure you are matching up your notches, and you're going to pin. And then using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, you're going to backstitch at the beginning and backstitch at the end, and then finish off your seams. Do that on both of your shoulder seams. Okay, so now that I have attached my front to back at shoulders right here. So after I did that, I went ahead and searched the seam allowance and then pressed my seams towards the back of the blouse or garment. All right, so after I do that, I'm gonna go ahead and put the blouse aside for a quick second and go ahead and grab pattern piece number 15, which is your sleeve band. So what you want to do is, with wrong sides together, you want to put your sleeve bands wrong sides together. There is a notch, so pin at that notch. And then you're going to pin the length of the sleeve band. Now, using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, you're just going to base from top to bottom. Okay, so now that I have done the sleeve band, go ahead and grab your blouse. Okay. And I'm going to show you on one side. So with the blouse facing up, right side up, what you want to do is pin your sleeve band to your blouse. Now, the center dot is supposed to match up with your shoulder seams, not your yoke, your shoulder seams, okay? So make sure that where your notch is, right here, is meeting up with the notch at the back of your blouse. And then you're going to pin. So that's why it's important to make sure you are transferring your notches and your dots in all symbols. You're also going to pin at this dot. Then you're going to match this dot with the shoulder seams of the back and the yoke. So make sure that matches up, and make sure that the seam is to the back of your garment. So that seam should be pressed towards the back pattern piece, which was pattern piece number 14. And then you're also going to pin this this dot to this dot right here. Make sure that matches up as well. And pin. And then just pin in a few more places to keep everything together, and make sure that this seam right here between your front and your yoke is facing the back. You should have pressed that seam up towards the yoke. All right, so now that you have it pinned, using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, you're going to backstitch at the beginning and backstitch at the end as well. Okay, so now that I went ahead and sewn on my sleeve band, I pressed the seam. Well, I sewn the sleeve band on using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then I trimmed my seam allowance down and serged my edge. After I did that, I went ahead and pressed the seams towards the blouse. So basically, you're going to press it in towards the blouse. Now that that's done with right sides together, so pick up your blouse, and with right sides together, you want to pin the underarm seams. So I'm going to turn my blouse this way so you're able to see. And with right sides together, you're going to pin your underarm seams. So make sure you are matching up the notches. So using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, you're going to start at the dot, back stitch at the beginning, and then go all the way down to the hem and back stitch at the end as well. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at the hem, back stitch at the beginning, and then sew all the way up to the dot and back stitch at the dot. And then I'm going to finish off my seams. Okay, so I went ahead and attached my underarm seam. So this is what the top is looking like right now. You are more than halfway done with this top. So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to top stitch the sleeve band. So making sure that the seam allowance on the sleeve band is pressing down, facing the blouse. You're going to top stitch as close as possible. If you can, try to stitch in the ditch, but I'm just going to top stitch as close to this edge as possible all the way around. Okay, so now that I have top stitched as close to the edge as possible on my sleeve band and on my blouse, so what you're going to do, I'm going to put my top aside for a second. So what you want to do is cut a piece of ribbon. Now this ribbon is 1/4 of an inch wide, and this is 45 inches long. So the pattern calls for 1 1/4 yard. So 1 yard is 36 inches and 1/4 of a yard is 9 inches. So 36 plus 9 is 45. So that's how I came up with 45 inches for your ribbon. Now I know mine do not match, but this is what I had in my stash and I didn't want to go out just to go buy some ribbons. So what I'm going to do is cut it in half. So I'm going to match up the ends. And I'm just going to cut it in half. All right, and after I cut it in half, I'm going to attach, now this is the right side of my wrap top. So I'm going to open it up and I'm going to place the ribbon right towards the back seam right here. And I'm going to pin. So basically I want to center it with this back seam allowance. So you want to pin there. And you're going to place it on this dot right here. So making sure it's even with the side seam, making sure that you are getting that dot. To stitch mine across using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm just going to tack it down just a little bit. So just do that for your ribbons. Okay, so now that I have added my ribbons to the inside of the right side seam and to the front of the left at the dot, move your blouse to the side for a quick second and grab your facing pieces, which is pattern piece number 6 and 7. And with right sides together, you're going to pin at the shoulders. All right. So using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, you're going to back stitch at the beginning and at the end. So across both of your shoulder seams, press your seams open. After you press your seams open, you want to finish off the unnotched edge. So which is this inner side right here, you want to finish that off. So when you look at it, I'm going to show you what it should look like. And you want to finish off this edge right here when looking at it, because this outer edge right here should not have any notches on it. And that's the edge that you want to finish off with your pinking shears, serger, or you could literally turn in 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, open it out, press to that seam, and then press it again and create a nice narrow hem as well all the way around. Okay, so now that I have attached my shoulder seams for my facing together, I have pressed the seams open, I went ahead and finished off the unnotched edge, and then I went ahead and add my label, my garment label, which is my daughter's, but it's no big deal because she has tons of these little labels or whatever. It was an order that was sent to me incorrectly, but that's not a big deal. That's not what this video is about. So go ahead and grab your blouse, and with right sides together, you're going to take your facing, and starting at the back, I'm going to pin at the back, matching up the notches. And you're going to pin at that notch, and then you're going to pin at the other notch as well. Now, using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, you're going to start at the back of the garment, back stitch at the beginning, sew all the way down to the end of one side, back stitch at the end of that side, come back, turn it over, come back to the center, and then do the opposite direction. And then after that, you want to trim down your seam allowance as well and press up towards the facing. Okay, so I went ahead and attach the facing onto my blouse. Now, one thing I'm going to do is go ahead and trim my facing, and I'm going to trim it down to about 3/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way around. So now that I stitched on the facing, the next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and do my hem. I will not be understitching right at this moment because I want to get my hem done before I understitch. So what I'm going to do is create a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance line all the way across using a basting stitch. Once I do that, I'm going to press to that stitching line all the way around, and then I'm going to press up again to encase that stitching. And then I'm going to stitch close to the edge. However, I'll be stitching on the right side instead of on the wrong side because I want a clean finish. Okay, so I went ahead and did the hem of my blouse. I went ahead and after stitching on the facing, I went ahead and understitched and then gave it a really good press. After I pressed the facing, I went ahead and tacked it down at the shoulder seam. So I tacked it here on this seam as well as on this seam right here. It's really hard for you to tell, but you want to tack it down to where the facing is just not flopping up, and then give it another press after you do that. So now that the blouse is completely done, you could go ahead. Now, if these ties are too long for you, you could go ahead and cut it to however long you want. Mine is fine to tie a bow on the inside. So how this works is this piece is wrapped around. You tie your little bow on the side, and then this piece wraps over. Now that your wrap top is done and completed, you can move your top out of the way. The last thing you need to do is your ties. So you should have 4. So put 2 out of the way for a quick second. And I started, but I'm going to tell you exactly what I did to mine. So with right sides together, the notched edge, you're going to do right sides together. You're going to pin and then sew across using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then press your seams open on both of the ties. Once you do that, with right sides together, you're going to pin the ties all the way around, leaving about a good 1 to 2 inches, enough for you to turn. So I'm going to pin right at the seams where I stitched them together. And then I'm going to leave about a good inch and a half opening at this time. So that's what I'm going to do to mine. So I'm going to continuously pin all the way around, stitch, leaving about a good inch opening between these two pins. turn it out, give it a good press, and I am completely done with the top, and so are you. Well, there you have it. We have sewn our 4th top as part of our pre-spring series, top series. So like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, keep sewing.